Yeah, I want to make it clear, except for the points which are explicitly taught by the church, there's plenty of room for differences of opinion. Obviously, we all have to submit to church teaching, but you aren't bound by the opinions of a priest, and I won't take it personally as long as you don't insult Our Lady or my mother. So, that being said, I think for the most part I can make a very strong case for what I'm going to say. It's mostly just horse sense, and hopefully it won't be very surprising to anyone. It's an immense topic to talk about relationship between boys and girls and bringing them up. So I'm going to talk for a while and then recommend various resources and then run down the questions that were sent in. I jotted a few notes. For the most part, it's extemporaneous, so I'm just looking at my notes to refer to the points I wanted to say. I would start with just a general warning for people that are perfectionists or have scruples. There's an important principle that you should know, and it applies to this and everywhere else in your life. And the principle is the perfect is the enemy of the good. The perfect isn't the enemy of the bad, it's the enemy of the good. So if you're a perfectionist, you're never going to be happy with what's good enough. And you just have to you have to be happy with what's good enough. We want to do the best we can, but this isn't the Garden of Eden. You're not the Blessed Mother. I'm not St. Joseph. We're just going to do the best we can in life. And I know I spend a lot of time kind of talking people off the ledge, especially women, and that's not picking on them because they're perfectionists. So that's just something you have to realize a weakness. If you have that, be aware of that. So anything I say, take it as it's meant and not like you have to be perfect. We want to strive to be holy, but if we fall down, that's what confession's about. Okay, so we're going to start with the general principles. Since I'm talking to women, I'm mostly focusing in that direction. Girls, we'll touch on guys, but actually raising boys to be men is essentially the department of men. And that just, one of the big failures right now is raising men. I will say a little bit about that later, but it takes men to turn boys into men. And if there isn't a husband or a father at home, then a big brother, an uncle, a guy, a coach, somebody, but it takes men to bring guys into the world of men. And I may say something about that a little later, depending, but let's go down the principles. First basic principle is girls are a barometer for the moral atmosphere in a society. That's just a principle. I tell young priests when they go to a new parish, it takes about 5 minutes to figure out where the parish is. All you have to do is just observe carefully the women and the girls, and you know where the moral standards are. I mean, this starts in the Garden of Eden and goes forward, but if the women are here, the men are there. If the women are here, the men are there. If the women are here, the men are there. That's an average. There's bad women and really good men, but I mean, that's an average. There's a necessary conclusion right now, given that, is that in our society, we live in a brothel. There's no nice way to put it. It's a rude word, but that's where we're living. We're living in a brothel. And it's not, barring divine intervention, this is not going to change. So that's something to be very aware of, and especially raising girls, because y'all are way more sensitive to what everybody else does than guys. We're kind of clueless. We focus on one thing, can walk right through a living room, never move anything. I have a buddy that's a priest up in Oklahoma. I go up and visit him over the past decade or so. I can tell you where the piles are on the floor in his rectory, and I can even tell you what books are in them. They haven't moved. That's how guys are. I mean, and he knows where you just walk, you weave your way to his office and all that. That's how we are. We're not interior decorators. The guy that's interior decorator is really a girl. I mean, this is how these things are. So because we live in a brothel, it's really important when you're raising girls to think about those kind of things, because they have to be, you have to really think about what are we going to do. We'll get to that in a second. Second basic principle is every girl as such either proposes virtue or vice to those around her. Every girl as such either proposes virtue or vice to those around her. She either models Eve or Our Lady. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. They have it in the fairy tales. Beauty and the Beast is a story about the effect that women have on men, what a good woman has. You don't have to know anything about Adam and Eve to understand Beauty and the Beast, because it's just true. And there's probably, besides Little Red Riding Hood, which is like disobedient girls not listening to their mom and wandering off, talking to people in the forest and bad wolves and all. I mean, there's probably ones about bad girls getting guys to be bad. I don't remember my fairy tales. But the point is that every woman as such either proposes virtue or vice to those around her. Now, there's a corollary to that. There's an immediate corollary. That principle. Woman's clothing is a statement. It's an advertisement. Properly understood, it's an exterior sign of the nobility, the dignity, the humanity, and the beauty of femininity as such. That's what it is. Those that want to imitate Eve, like all these posters we've got her on the signs and all that, it's an advertisement of body parts and dehumanizes and degrades a woman. That's a necessary corollary. If the church or the priest talk about rules, that can only be properly understood in that context. Women are supposed to be colorful and beautiful, with certain exceptions. Widows and religious always had permission to sort of dress in an unattractive, dark way on purpose. But the rest don't. St. Gemma had to have permission from her director to wear widow's weeds. Women are supposed to be colorful and beautiful. Now, that's somewhat culturally determined. Obviously, what's colorful and beautiful in Bavaria is not the same as Kerala, India. It doesn't matter. But the idea is y'all are the flowers in society. So that's something important. And the only reason for the church enunciating the rules is when you don't have to ordinarily, but when you live in a place like a brothel, it's just to make sure everybody knows it's a fair fight and where the lines are. That's all. It's not that big of a deal, because if a person has a sense of their dignity, they will. Clothes are very important. I'd still be a priest if I was up here in Bermuda shorts and one of those Hawaiian shirts and gold chains and all that. But I think I would have a frightful effect on anybody, including myself. I mean, my understanding of myself would be just ridiculous. But it wouldn't change the essential fact that I'm a priest, but it would sure change how people would think about me and interact with me. And it's the same. So that's just it. Girls either propose virtue or vice to those around them. That's just a given. That's the beauty of womanhood, or the tragedy. Third principle. Girls are made to be loved by a man. For religious, single woman, our Lord is the one that ideally takes that place. If he isn't taking that place, there's going to be a crisis, huh? But it's just it's innate in a woman to be loved by a man. When she's little, of course, she needs her father's love and all. This is my personal opinion. I think at least some of the feminist anger is rooted in the inability of certain strong women to find a man worthy of surrendering to. I really think that. That's an opinion, but certainly in my experience, some of the feminists are. A woman has an innate desire to surrender herself, but a man has a desire to sacrifice himself, and it's not the same. It's not the same at all. There's a great essay by C.S. Lewis on chivalry. Off the top of my head as I'm standing here, I don't remember in which of his collections it is, but I'd really recommend reading that, because chivalry is a specifically Christian notion. When the Titanic went down, 80% of the women survived. But a huge number of the men didn't. That doesn't happen when a ferry goes down in Indonesia. Mostly the men survive. Why is that? Because we're more powerful. We can trample you. The women and children first is a specifically Christian notion, rooted in chivalry, and C.S. Lewis isn't going to talk about that aspect, but it's something really worth meditating on. It really is. It'll help you understand femininity and masculinity just by thinking about that. There's a corollary to this principle that girls are made to be loved by a man. If a girl is not loved, if she's not being loved by her dad, or someone that took the place, like an uncle or something, if the dad isn't in the home, and it starts with the dad, it's so important. She has this innate desire to be loved. She's going to look for love. And girls will play at sex to get love, and guys will play at love to get sex. That's the carnal rule. And the girl always loses in that. And the feminists can scream bloody murder all day long, but the dynamic is that way. Maybe rude to say, but it's just realistic. That is the default setting that will happen if we fall to the natural level. And we are all around us. It's important. And raising girls, you have to keep this in mind, because it's one of the things that you want to, at the right ages, and we'll talk a little bit about that stuff to a certain degree, but you want to make sure your girls understand that. Heaven help the girl that doesn't understand that clearly. Okay. Within the boundaries of marriage, of course, sex is an ennobling experience. It's by that act that a man turns his wife into a mother. And it's also a blessed thing. It's the first blessing that God gave mankind, was to be fruitful and multiply. So within the boundaries of marriage, it's ennobling and it's blessed. Outside of it, it's profoundly degrading. And the wounds, especially in the girl, I'm not saying the guys don't get wounded, but especially in the girl, so frequently these really serious psychological / spiritual wounds are a result of engaging this game. She's trying to get love, and you can't get it that way. It's not possible to get that way. It has to be an expression of love already safely established. Otherwise, it leaves wounds. And heaven help the poor girl that doesn't understand that, and their number's legion. Another corollary to this principle that girls are made to be loved by a man is if a girl, and it relates to one we already said, if a girl wants to land the right guy, she should keep in mind she wants to be someone worthy, that he sees as somebody worthy of sacrificing himself for. This is a good thing to tell your girls. He has to see her. She's not like the other girls. That's key. That's absolutely key. Because the whole mysterious power that God has given woman, and it's a real power, it's an unbelievable power. God has given woman the moral power. God gave man the physical power. God gave woman the moral power. And it's really right there. The guy will think, I can't believe that she is in love with me. She's better than me, and yet she follows me. This propels him to try to better himself and sacrifice himself for her. A girl can't help but be an examination of conscience for a guy if she's proposing herself as a girl. And not in an affected way, it's psychologically the way a guy is. A guy that looks up to his best girl, morally speaking, he looks down at her. And heaven help her if he looks down at her. He'll never be able to really respect her like he should. Really important. Fourth principle. Grace perfects nature. Prayer is not sufficient. Being pious is not sufficient. St. Augustine says, pray as if everything depends on God, and work as if everything depends on you. That's an important thing to get through to the kids. I've been talking about girls, but all this stuff, we have to understand that. It's not just the church, let's take a scenic cruise. It's a church militant. We're fighting. We're fighting to get to heaven. So grace perfects nature. Prayer is not sufficient. The sacraments are miraculous, but they need, so to speak, surface area to work on, and that's our part of the deal. We'll talk a little bit about that in application maybe as I go. Fifth basic principle is keep in mind you're trying to raise virtuous, holy adults. You're trying to raise adults. Adults. It takes 18 years to raise an 18-year-old. Do you have a plan? The first thing to be determined is the end. What are we shooting for? When you're starting a horse, I'm just using a country thing. You don't just sort of randomly do things and go, boy, I don't know, maybe I'll sack it out. Maybe you got to clear, if you don't have a clear idea where you're trying to go with that horse, you're going to get right where you're going, which is nowhere. The horse doesn't know what you want. You know what you want. You figure it out. It's the same with the kid. You got to have a clear idea. Insofar as you have a clear idea, then you at least have something to measure against. We don't need any more thumb-sucking 27-year-old boys sleeping on their parents' couch. It's a catastrophe with the men. I'm talking to women. Wait, I'll talk to the men. It's a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe. Everywhere I go, I work overseas a lot in Sydney, in that parish. I see all these girls. The only thing missing is a tattoo saying, marry me. There's so many neat girls in our parishes all over, and there's not many neat guys. There's reasons for that. And you can't make the boys into men. You can keep out of their way. You can keep them as boys. That's part of it. But we have to have an idea of where are we trying to head. If you don't have it, I'm going to make some suggestions for reading later on, but I just want to go through some principles right now. We have to have an idea. And you're not just trying to raise any kind of adult. You're trying to raise a confessor of the faith. We're living in a brothel. You are going to raise martyrs. Have that in your mind. Have it in their mind. Read stories of martyrs to them. It is a reality, and it's not going to be 40 years from now, and it's not going to be 20 years from now. Tell them what's going on right now with the Chaldeans in Iraq, and see how much help we're giving them. And that's going to be us, and it's not going to be long. You got to be having clear in your mind, what am I trying to do? What is the goal here? What do I expect at 18 years old? What do I expect at 17? The first thing to determine is the end, and then you work towards it. So you know, where are we getting? It's essential. Adults don't just happen. Look at our society. What proof there is. It's essential. You're trying to raise adults, holy adults, confessors of the faith. Corollary to this is that you're trying to raise adults. Is with girls, are you raising them so they have a skill set, a feminine skill set? I'm not just talking about makeup here. Which that's fine. I'm not making fun of it, but they have to have a feminine skill set. Years ago, I come from the country, so when we have what are called country schools. You might call them one-room schools here, but we call them country schools where I'm from. So it's a one-room schoolhouse, and you always, at least till recently, we had about 5% of the school districts in America in a state with under 1 million people. So we got a lot of school districts, and these little country schools out in the country, and so the school board will hire a single woman to be the teacher for more than one reason. First off, she can get her done. Second off, that's an opportunity for the bachelors, right? That's where wives come from, because you come from country where there aren't many women. It's not like here. Okay, anyway, so the first thing you do when there's a country school teacher is you go out there to visit her, because you're assessing the situation. I can remember driving out to visit with one, and this buddy of mine, he found out I was going, so to make it even, we went together in my pickup. So I wouldn't have a jump. That's just true. I'm not embarrassed. So we go there, and we're sitting there visiting with her. Well, in the course of about 20 minutes, I found out she hated to cook, she hated to clean, she didn't know how to. She went down the whole darn list, By the time you're just like, you're just throwing in your cars. I'm being nice, so you get in the pickup, and you're driving home. So, I get it. So I got to fix the fence, fix the roof, fix the pickup, and fix dinner. What the heck is this? What did her mama raise? It's a division of labor. And I'm not making fun of it. It's a division of labor. We need the guys to have a skill set too. I'm talking to the girls right now. But give them a skill set so that they're not sitting there. And I will tell you how many times there are girls that are mad. They will come and complain to you as a priest because they realize they were raised to kind of be a husband because they were raised in a family. And I'm not against getting education or anything, but they were raised as if they were going to be the husband. And then it's occurring to them, I really don't know how to do anything like the mom stuff. I don't even know how to cook anything. They've been prepared. And there's, it can be, but why have all that burden on you when you can fix it on the way and get them so that they come up? What are you trying to produce at 18 years old? Have this in your mind so that doesn't happen to the poor girl. And there might be some of you sitting here, please don't nod, but there might be some of you sitting here that found yourself in that situation. And that's a lot of catch up to do. Don't do that to your children. Let's just get rid of the 60s, 70s, 80s, these weird ideas from before and just raise them up to be good girls, whatever they're going to do. Those saintly women, they all knew how to do all those things. You can start with Our Lady. The most education you could get in those days. She's in the temple from 3, so she's a highly educated woman, but she knew how to, what's our Lord wearing when they're playing dice for it, right? She could do it all. And that's it. So you want to make sure you do that. So does she have a feminine skill set? Does she have an adult understanding or appreciation for typical male weaknesses and flaws and female weaknesses and flaws? Because that's your job. That's another thing. I'm going to read some things here later that I go through in people I prepare for marriage, just snippets of things. But that's your job too, so that they're in the real world, not in a fantasy world. Because except for the Holy Family, everybody else is going to have issues. The perfect's enemy of the good. You're not going to marry somebody perfect, so you're looking at them. It's like buying a car. You're trying to look, what are the positive points? What are the negative points about this? Is this something I want? You know, as dispassionately as possible. Most of them, 2/3 of them are going to have a vocation to marriage, roughly, if we follow St. John Bosco. You know, at really Catholic times in Ireland and Spain both, they had about 1/4 of the people in religious life for the priesthood. St. John Bosco says it's about 1/3 of the people that have a religious vocation to the priesthood. Now, not all, so that's an ideal. But so you can assume that on the average, 2/3 to 3/4 of my kids, on the average, because they're not average, one family might be, one might, it's not that, but are going to be getting married. Ideally, if that's it, if that's their vocation. Am I preparing for that? And even if you're preparing them for that and they go to religious life, that's not a catastrophe. We live with priests that, a cup of coffee, that would be the most challenging, the gourmet dinner to produce something like that, you know. It's unbelievable at times. The guys are totally helpless. They got away from home like that. I don't understand that, but it's a reality. It's just unbelievable. And Father can vouch for that. He's back there. You watch these guys, it's like, hey, he opened a can of beans. We're getting somewhere, you know? Okay. And I'm going to come back to some of these things. 6th basic principle. Barring miracles of grace or just absolutely amazing life experiences, the children are going to leave home with the values you've impressed upon them. If that doesn't scare you a little, you better think really hard about that. Is there a true reverence and respect for the opposite sex being modeled in your home, especially by mom? Do you show your appreciation for your husband in front of the kids, both when he's there and when he's not there? Do you get yourself gussied up a little bit? Unless there's a sucking chest wound, do you get yourself gussied up a little bit and the kid's lined out to greet him when he comes through the door? Do you hold off asking him any important questions till you fed him? And do you keep the kids from asking him anything important till you fed him? These are just thoughtful things. You're trying to teach him reverence, because what you're trying to teach him is in a relationship, it's not about me. The priesthood isn't about me, it's about you. Christ our Lord, of course, but I'm serving Christ in you because I'm not cloistered. A relationship is not about me, and you're showing them that. You're modeling that with them. You got to show them that it's not about me and the kids, it's about him and the kids. Are they learning that from you? Because if they're not, you want to walk your way back through that and start adjusting the way it is. Now, marriages have their strains, I know that, but, think about it. Are you a nag? When your children see someone fall short, a relative, someone they know, someone on the street, some major figure, and they bring it up, what kind of message are you impressing on them by seeing this failure, this sin? It may be catastrophe. Is it, yes, that really isn't right, or maybe that's really wrong, but for the grace of God go I? Is that the kind of message you're giving him? Or is it rip on that person? Are you acting like Our Lady? Or like Eve? Would your speech an example on those kind of matters? Because this is really important. On those kind of matters, would your speech, an example on those kind of matters, reflect and resonate with Our Lady or with Eve? What kind of example are you setting there? Without excusing anyone. I explain to the kids, if that person had the graces that we've been given, if they had all the grace we've been given, they'd be better than we are. And if we'd had the life they've been given, we'd be worse than they are. Because we can say that about anybody. And it isn't excusing their behavior. But we should be able to say that. Have you established an atmosphere in which your children feel safe in talking to you, even about their big failures? I'm not talking about you prying it out of them. Don't ever ask them why they didn't go to communion. Ever, ever. That's between them and the priest. Ever. You'll notice it, you just pray. Or you're going to be causing them to make bad communions. Guaranteed. I absolutely guarantee it. You can't be like that. You have to be like Our Lady. Our Lady sees this, but she isn't coming down from heaven and smacking us every time we do something stupid. She's praying for us. You have to be like Our Lady. It doesn't mean it doesn't bother. It should bother you. But you should be praying. You should really be praying. And not ever say something about that. You shouldn't pester them about getting to confession. If you're setting the example of going regularly, they'll get there. If you ever have a real question about it, you can bring it up in the confessional with the priest about it and find out if it's something, but I'm not talking about a week. If this is a thing that goes on long term, then you take a priest counsel on that. But don't ever ask why your husband or your kids aren't going to communion. Ever. This is a common thing that a woman might think is good. That's very bad. You want to set an atmosphere in which your children feel safe in talking, even about their moral failings and weaknesses. They might not very often. It depends a lot on their disposition. But they should feel safe with that. Like they can place that in your hands and you're not going to crush it. Okay? That's so important. Men are far from being faultless in these matters, that's for sure. Overall, though, moral atmosphere is going to be set by the woman. You're with them more. Might be hard to hear. I'm going to say something here that might be hard to hear, but I think everyone here should think hard about this. Sometimes I think that if St. Mary Magdalene showed up at some of our traditional communities, there'd be a committee of women that go upbraid her and then yank their kids out and go somewhere else. And I don't say that with any delight. If someone hasn't ever committed a mortal sin, they should even be more grateful to God for the mercies He showered on it. So it's one of the things, if you're training your kids right, you're not going to fall apart if some unwed mother shows up with her kid at Mass. We're glad they're there at Mass. What are the other options? Don't we want them there? Would you make her and her child feel welcome? And even in your home? It's something to think about. And that doesn't mean that we approve of sin. But that's not the same thing I'm asking here. And you don't have to answer me. These are questions for you to meditate on. I'm not going to give you a test. Seventh basic principle, the teaching of the church. This is more concretely having to do with things a little later in life. I'll just read it, but I want to spend some time on this, and then I'm going to walk back through some of the stuff we've already said. I got a whole bunch of things here. So we'll review. An occasion of sin is any person, place, or thing that tempts a man to sin. There are 4 different types of occasions of sin: remote or near, which are opposed to each other, and voluntary and necessary. So you have a remote occasion of sin or a near occasion of sin, a voluntary occasion of sin or a necessary occasion of sin. Okay, those are opposed to each other. So a remote occasion of sin is a situation in which men seldom fall. A near occasion of sin is a situation in which men always or nearly always fall. So that's remote and near. Remote, rarely; near, nearly always. Voluntary occasion of sin can be avoided. A necessary occasion of sin cannot be avoided, at least not without serious loss. But since it can't be avoided, men must take the proper precautions in order to avoid falling. A necessary occasion of sin, a male OBGYN, he is going to see women with their clothes off. It's just part of his thing. If he's saying his prayers, he won't have any temptations. You get a gracious state, he won't even think about anybody but his wife. Another guy doing that is toast. A male nurse, same kind of thing. I'm just using those because there's no problem at all. If they're saying their prayers, the woman won't be a temptation to them. Doesn't matter, because you get the gracious state. It would be the same if it was a diocesan censor and a bishop appointed him to review things if they're heretical and all that. He could read that stuff, no problem. Somebody else leave him through that, good luck. Okay, because you get a gracious state. Okay, so an occasion of sin is any person, place, or thing that tempts a man to sin. A remote occasion of sin is a situation in which men rarely sin, like having a bottle of whiskey in the cupboard. A near occasion of sin is a situation in which men always, nearly always sin like viewing porn, okay? Voluntary occasion can be removed, and necessary occasion can't be avoided, at least not without grievous loss, but the men must take proper precautions in order to avoid falling if he's in a near occasion. Okay, now, let's ask ourselves a few questions. First, are we allowed to place ourselves in an occasion of sin? It depends on what kind of occasion we're speaking of. Are we allowed to place ourselves in a remote occasion of sin? Being alive is a remote occasion of sin. We don't have to, anything, sure, of course. We don't have to worry about remote. How about near occasion of sins? Are we allowed to place ourselves in a near occasion of sin? It depends on whether it's necessary or it's voluntary. Okay, is a voluntary near occasion of sin? Is no. We can't voluntarily put ourselves into harm's way. That's exactly what we're promising not to do when we make an act of contrition. We promise to avoid near occasion sin. We're promised to avoid the voluntary near occasion sins. Those are the things we can avoid. If it's a necessary near occasion of sin, then we can put ourselves into it if we take the proper precautions to avoid falling. The more serious the occasion of sin, the more serious the precautions we need to take. It's like running around on the edge of a slippery cliff. Okay, that is all by way of introduction to the next quote. I'm just going to read from Moral Manual. I got another one sitting in my confessional, but I'll just read this one because it all says the same thing, just different words, but same. Quote, company keeping with intention of timely marriage can be considered as a necessary occasion of sin, since our society, at least, people do not marry strangers. However, those keeping company, especially engaged, must use the ordinary supernatural natural means whereby the near occasion of falling to sin is made remote, especially with regard to circumstances of being alone together. Close quote. This is from a Moral Manual written in 1963, so it's, and there hasn't been some kind of evolutionary change in human weakness, during our lifetimes. Okay, so company keeping with intention of early marriage can be considered as a necessary occasion of sin. However, those keeping company must use the ordinary supernatural natural means whereby the near occasion of falling of sin is made remote, especially with regard to being alone together. 2 points we should burn into our minds. First, company keeping. You can call it dating, you can call it courtship. We'll talk. These terms don't really matter that much. We're going to talk about this. It doesn't matter. I mean, it matters maybe to the evangelicals. It doesn't matter to us. The concept is what matters. We're going to get into the concept in a minute. Company keeping is a necessary occasion of sin. Why? Because we don't marry strangers. And it's definitely a grievous loss to not be married when someone has that vocation. In other words, it's serious business, though. It's not just recreational activity. I said just. It can be recreational, but it can't be just that. It's serious. It has to have a serious note to it. Okay. Second, because it's a necessary occasion of sin, those keeping company must use the ordinary supernatural and natural means to make sure the near occasion of falling sin is made remote. I'll just quote what St. Alphonsus says about that. Here's St. Alphonsus. There are three principal means to be described in necessary occasions of sin. The first, and notice which ones he uses as an example of necessary occasion of sins. The first is to avoid being, as much as possible, being alone together with one another. Or speaking confidentially with one another. In other words, long phone calls after about 10 at night, unless that's just when the people are getting off work kind of thing. It's okay to talk short times but courtship, dating, whatever, when people are interested, if they're going into these things late at night, on and on and on and on and on, we got bodies. You're going to get in trouble even on the phone. It's just going to happen. You don't have to believe me on that. It's just true. Okay. Second is prayer, an unceasing petition to God and the Blessed Virgin for help to resist the temptation. Third is frequenting the sacraments of penance and the Eucharist, by which strength is obtained to resist temptation. So there we are. Avoid being alone together and talking for long periods of time, on the cell phone at dark 30. Pray, especially to Our Lady, and go to confession and communion frequently. When people come to me, they're engaged, I tell them, okay, now if you're not going every week to confession, you're wrong. And probably when you get closer to your marriage, you might have to go more often, because the devil is putting out a cigarette and going, okay, I want to ruin this, and I want to get it ruined beforehand. And that's, devils are a lot smarter than us. They're pretty dumb in certain ways, but they're still angels, and we got to be careful. And they know the rules, and so they want to make sure the people get out of it. Let's talk. So courtship. Somebody sent an article around, so I'll talk about this a little bit. And on the way into that, let me read a couple things. So let's get a little perspective on the battlefield. I got a lot of things here. So September 9th. So this is just a little one. In the spring of 2000, Zogby International asked more than 1,000 U.S. adults whether they'd ever visited a sexually oriented website. Only 1 in 5 had done so. Among born-again Christians, 18% had gone to such sites, just 3 percentage points less than the general public. Fast forward today, a group called Proven Men Ministries commissioned the Barna Group to examine current pornography use. Barna found that 64% of American men and 20% of women view pornography at least monthly. For Christian men, that number is 55%. Those are low. That would be low, because this is the kind of thing that even statistically you're going to underreport. 14 years ago, only 1 out of 3 men had ever gone to a pornography site, but now near 1/3 of men under 30 do so on a daily basis. And if you think it can't get worse, the survey found that 18% of men believe they may be addicted to pornography. That's more than 20 million men in deep trouble. That is serious. Now this is Spring 2014 Christians Apologetics Journal. It's an article by Donahue Rice Hughes, called The Internet Pornography Pandemic, the largest unregulated social experiment in human history, which is an understatement. I'm just going to read a couple things from this. They're talking about in 2010, the Witherspoon Institute released the Social Cost of Pornography, a statement of findings and recommendations. The first multifaceted, multidisciplinary, scholarly review of contemporary pornography since the advent of the Internet. The report's findings conclude, this is going to be obvious, that pornography, especially via the Internet, harms children, women, and men, and fuels pornography addiction, the breakdown of marriage, and sex trafficking. Oh yeah, that's a surprise. Okay. With the Internet, the protective barrier between the sex industry and youth dissolved, and the home, historically considered a safe haven, has been the very place where the sex industry is grooming our youth. Now with mobile Internet access via smartphones and other portable devices, nearly a third of the teens carry portable X-rated theaters in their pockets. You know, I wouldn't have believed this if somebody would have told me 20 years ago. I was telling somebody earlier, I mean, my good buddies of mine ranching in western North Dakota, they just got the telephone in the Reagan administration, so he made a big call to that whole part of the country because it's the last big place in the lower 48 to get telephone. And now we got this goofy stuff. I mean, if you'd have told me people are carrying this stuff around, I'd have laughed at you. There's no way. And I can get up in the pulpit and say this till my face turns blue, saying if you have the Internet, and I would say if you have the Internet, you have to have a lockdown squeezed out and a what on it, every kind of filter barrier, and the women should have the password to go over so many people's head, and then they come in with little broken Johnny. Well, I can't fix little broken Johnny. Your little Johnny is a little boy. You just have to take on faith and priests that you have to protect the boys and the men in this. You have to. You're women. You're the moral authority in that. If it means locking up the phones at night, I don't care. Get a milk box or whatever you call it, lock it, put a padlock. Take the dang router off at night. It shouldn't be on in the middle of the night, etc. There's all kinds of different things to do, but do it. Don't wait till it's broken. You know, I tell these girls that meet a perfectly nice guy, no, till he's not hooked on porn. You can't ever meet that need. He doesn't even know who a girl is. He doesn't even know what a girl is. How can he? A girl's a collection of body parts to him. He's spun up. And these aren't just, you know, this is, Joe, everybody's just from these statistics. It's just a nightmare. I'll just read a couple more. Porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. 30% of the internet industry is pornography. The online porn industry makes over $3,000 per second. Mobile porn is expected to reach $2.8 billion here by 2015. That's not too far away. The U.S. is the largest producer and exporter of hardcore porn, DVDs, and web material. A Google Trends analysis indicates searches for teen porn have more than tripled between 2005 and 2013. In 2013, teen-related porn, there's 500,000 searches daily. 1/3 of total daily searches of porn sites. Of the 304 sites analyzed, 88% contain physical aggression. Physical aggression, and that isn't going to be towards the guys. Physical aggression towards our girls. I'll just read a couple other. Impact on emotional mental development of children. I'm going to make my own observations in a second, which are not scientific. Children are especially susceptible to influences affecting their development. Research shows porn short-circuits and distorts the normal personality development process and supplies misinformation about a child's sexuality, sense of self, and body that leaves the child confused, changed, and damaged. Porn often introduces children prematurely to sexual sensations which they are developmentally unprepared to deal. Yeah, that's to put it mildly. Okay. Here we go. Porn teaches sex without love, intimacy, tender touch, responsibility, and commitment. Just as 30-second commercials can influence whether we choose one popular soft drink over another, exposure to porn shapes our attitudes and values and often our behavior. And I'm sorry, I think most TV shows are actually porn. I don't think it's just, you know, the way they depict women, like they're just a bunch of body parts. It's so offensive, you can't believe it. Teens also express great difficulty in bridging the gap between the porn experience and the real-world sexual experiences. The demand for today's preteen girls to be porn-ready and provide porn sex when data is dawning. According to Courtney, age 18, it does make them curious, just like a little girl when she watched Cinderella, you know. She wants to be just like her. And kids that watch porn, they want to be just like them. We'd watch it together, and then the guys did expect me to act out like that. But it destroyed our lives, our respect for others, and our relationships. Justin, age 16, stated, I just wanted to do what they did in the porn. I didn't even care about the relationship anymore. I just wanted to have sex with as many girls as I could. Girls in real life don't act like the girls in porno. Well, no kidding. What's porn about? It's as if a girl exists to degrade herself for a guy. Those girls have no emotional needs. They never have a period. They only exist to degrade themselves for a guy. There's not a single thing you have to think about emotionally. It's as unrealistic as Spock, only Spock isn't dangerous. No girl's going to fall in love with some guy and expect him to be passionless. The whole idea is idiotic. But the guy, you know, that's watching this stuff, what's his idea of a girl? Snap my fingers, do something degrading. That is what he's getting in his head. When you get with them and they don't act like porn stars, it makes you feel unmanly. It's disappointing. Oh yeah, okay, great. It goes on and on. It goes on and on. But I don't think I really need to read it to you because it's pretty obvious. It's really obvious. So, anecdote. It was the late 80s, the early 90s, in the part of when the part of Montana I was living in when we got television, because they got those stupid dishes. And all of a sudden, you had you kind of know everybody. You know the name of their dog. You know, if somebody went and got drunk, you know everything you want to know. You don't have to be, it's just that way when you're from the real Boone Toolies. All of a sudden, I'm sorry, I'm just going to be rude. The little boys, these teenage boys are starting to act like dogs in heat. And you just grab hold of them. What is your major malfunction? Leave these girls alone because you grew up with them, you know. And what is going on here? And they're talking about ecstasy. Well, I knew it wasn't the street drug. We didn't have anything like that out there. And then I was out visiting a guy in a ranch, and they just got this dish, and they had this Canadian chip on it, which decoded everything or whatever, I don't know. And they're flipping through things. Almost like, what was that? You know, he goes by because it's a porn thing. He says, so that's this channel, it's called Ecstasy. Blank light goes on, you know. Here we are from just sort of, it was not the Garden of Eden, you know. You could get away from a lot of things. It wasn't the Garden of Eden, that's for sure. But it wasn't this oversexed, ridiculous, insane kind of thing with the boys and girls. And it turned into it like that. There were other effects from television, but, just like, you couldn't believe it. And it was like literally within a matter of months of people starting to get this dish that you started seeing the boys acting like this, and you'd never seen it before. And I'm not saying people didn't drive out into the hills and get in trouble. This isn't fantasy land, but it wasn't like this, just this sort of public oversight. They can't control themselves. They're just spun up. It's a catastrophe. We've never done something like this. Okay, so that's a background. That's one of the things. So dating. I'll just talk a little bit. There's an article here, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about this article, and then I'm going to come back and make some other comments on things. It's some kind of article by a homeschooling guy, grew up in the 90s. He appears to be an evangelical, I'd say, and he's against courtship, and he talks about the greatest generation. So he's talking about his grandparents in the 30s and 40s were encouraged to date and discouraged from going to study while in middle school. That's different from my generation, which is encouraged to wait until you're ready to get married before pursuing a romantic relationship. And he starts critiquing things. It's like, okay, buddy, I'm not that generation, but the first one of my buddies to get married was 16. That isn't happening right now. Most 16-year-old guys, when I was in high school, when I was a senior, I did have a girlfriend, because at the time I didn't know I have a vocation, and we were talking about getting married. Shock of shock. Her parents had got married when they were 16. That wasn't that uncommon where we're from. By the time I was 20, everybody I went to school with just about was married. People just got married, and they got married. So it isn't unusual that they'd start dating at a certain age, because they're thinking about getting married. Who can support a family at 16 now, or even 18? By the way, if you're raising a boy, that's one of the things he has to have in his mind from the youngest age. I got to be able to make money when I leave home, and I'm going to leave home when I'm 17 or 18. And you want him to do that. I'm not going to hold my family up as an example, because we're not. The Holy Family is an example, and we're not a bunch of canonized saints. But every one of us boys left home after our junior year and went and worked about 150 miles away, paid room and board and all that. And within a couple weeks after graduating, we left home, and he didn't think any different. And we went to college, and I was a junior in college before I thought, I didn't have to do this. It never even occurred to me, because my parents were so clever about, they were just, and my dad hadn't gone to college, but they were going to make sure, that. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending that at all, because you could work through. First I had a scholarship, but then I dropped out and went to work, and then when I went back, I'd work my way through. You can't do that anymore. And the last thing you want me to do is get many student loans. When you go bankrupt, what happens to your student loans? Anybody know? You can't default. It's slavery to the banks. They own these students the rest of their lives you can't default on a student loan. So you better think really hard about, if our kids are going on, how they're going to pay their way through. That's another thing to think about, but that's there. So he talks about these different things, and then I'm just some of the things, and he complains that these homeschool guys are rejected by the fathers because they have to ask them to go out. And I think, well, heck, I've been through that barrier myself. I didn't know it was that bad. Like Mom said, was always tell you, faint heart never won fair lady. You got to go ask the guy if you can go out with his daughter. What's wrong with that? Now, if the guy is psycho, that might be a problem. I don't know the community he's from, That's a different thing, because if dad isn't letting the girl go out with absolutely anybody. But it seems to me it's the most excellent screen possible, because the girl tells dad, I don't like this guy. And he says, oh, we don't like you. I mean, it's if the guy doesn't have any obvious qualities in it and she doesn't want to, whatever. But I mean, and the mom's in on that. I'm 100% for asking the parents. I see absolutely no problem with that. And if the guys are whining about it, well, get over it, pal. This isn't, she's not a toy. She has a dignity, and her parents love her. This is a great thing if the parents love her like that. It can be overdone. I'll talk to the guys about that sort of stuff, but I mean, and the women are certainly, you're going to have more of a sense on a lot of that stuff. You can smell out a fish. Between the two of you, you can tell if the guy's a screwball. You should be able to, because you got to grace his state. But, so what is it? If you can't go out until you're relatively ready to be married, a prompt marriage, then you don't date, court, whatever you want to call it, until you're ready to get married. That's just going through the Catholic moral principles. So, he doesn't have Catholic moral principles to do. That's why it is. So people might have gone out when they're 16, 17, 18, a couple generations ago, because they were going to get married. In some parts of the world, they still do. I think it's a tragedy how late people are getting married now, but that's because of other issues. But nonetheless, and the girl, you should tell him, don't go out with the guy unless he can put a roof over your head and food on the table. That's going to motivate that guy. A guy's looking for somebody he can sacrifice himself for. If this is his best girl, that's going to motivate him. That's just always the traditional thing. The girl, she says, yeah, I'll wait for you. He's off trying to figure out how to, strike oil or whatever. He's going to do whatever it takes. That's highly motivational for any guy. That's no obstacle whatsoever. I had I'll just tell it because you wouldn't know, but two extremely virtuous young people in another parish that I was in, and they fell in love when they're about 18, And so he went to the dad and asked him to take him out to lunch or whatever, and said, hey, can I court your daughter? Can I go out with her? And he says, can you put a roof over her head and food on the table? And he says, no. And he says, come back when you can. It wasn't mean. It was really friendly. Boy, that motivated that guy. He served my mass one day, and all of a sudden, he's going to college at the same time, and all of a sudden he's working in a thing, he gets a managerial position. I go, how much you make? And he says, $35,000. I go, when are you going to get married? The next day, their dad called up last night. He started laughing. He says, they're engaged. He said, I don't know what you told him yesterday, but it was that quick, because he's just motivated. He's just doing the best thing. They're a great couple. Just wonderful. But it motivated him so much as this 18-year-old guy going, wow, this is my best girl, I got to do something. And they weren't going out. They had a right to, like you tell them, you have a right to preserve your friendship and all that, and talk for so long every week, and but you can't be sitting here, if you're all just clinging on each other, this is you jump in a river, you're going to end, you got to get married before you get in the ocean, and that's just part of nature. That's, the Catholic Church has nothing to say about that. That's just, I'm talking to married women, but I mean, this is just the human condition. You got to get her done. And so you got to kind of moderate that, because I always tell them, you both are sitting on open kegs of gunpowder with lit cigars, so you got to be careful. And that's just the human condition. Since we're not Our Lady, we have original sin, we just have to be careful. But what you want to convey to these kids from the earliest years is, you don't go out till you're ready to get married. And why would the person you go out with doesn't mean you're going to marry him, but why would you go out with somebody that you don't think is potentially somebody you're going to marry? That's the whole object of the exercise. Now, I don't know exactly what he's writing about because I'm not an evangelical, but the object of the exercise is not just recreation. It's a serious thing. So it's going to be why would you go out with somebody you're not interested in? This doesn't make any sense. So obviously there's a recreational in that sense aspect, but it's more like a serious thing. Now, I'll make some remarks this is an ethnic kind of thing. You can take it for whatever it is, but coming from a largely German background, I really think the way the girls used to do it, from at least the part of the culture I'm from, was very smart. They call it going Dutch. It's just come from Deutsch. But a girl going Dutch, as a general principle, a properly raised German girl, it's over with now. Where I'm from, I mean, I don't know how it is in Germany, I don't know, but wouldn't take a gift from any man that wasn't a relative. Why? Because she wasn't going to be beholden to him. So when she's going out, she buys her meals, she buys everything. Because it's putting her in a position of power. Am I going to surrender to this guy? Because she's the woman. And if she's letting him buy everything and all that, I'm not saying that's intrinsically wrong at all, but what it does emotionally, it puts her in a different position than if she's sitting there kind of negotiating, like, is this somebody that I'm willing to, because once she says yes, then he has to take care of everything, of course. That's the whole way that the deal works. But until then, she's putting herself in somewhat of a position of power in that relationship where he has to actually, he can't buy her affections in any way, not even with the rose. I mean, it sounds harsh, but after he gets married, after they say yes, then he has to start romance, but he has to make his best pitch. I'm not telling everybody to do that, although girls that come to me for direction that are in that, I always tell them, you should do this, it's going to help you a lot. And it helps girls especially, it's really important if you have really kind of bubbly, vivacious sort of girls that can get talked into things, that they have principles like this, because it's a lot harder to get talked into something if you have a little barrier that's a family barrier. You don't have to call it going Dutch or whatever, but I mean, in our family, when you're a certain age, you just don't take it. It's a suggestion. You can do whatever you want with it, but it takes some of the pressure off the girl emotionally and puts her in more of a position of power in the negotiations, like, yeah, I'll surrender to this guy, yes or no. So the sanguine girl is the one that you need to watch the most carefully, because she's going to be most outgoing but the easiest to get talked into things. So you should know a little bit about what your girls are at. It doesn't mean she's a bad girl, but generally she can have an easier time getting talked into things just by her disposition than other girls. So anyway, I think you want to tell your girls, and your sons too. I mean, a marriage is like a waltz, but you're telling the girl it's like a waltz. So it's not like you're not important. You can say yes or no, but once you say yes, you got to waltz. So you're going to follow this guy around. You might have to be dodging his feet and look over his shoulder, and you aren't crashing into other people in chairs and stuff like that. But it's just like that in a marriage. It's not like the woman has any less dignity, but you have a different role, and you're going to have to trail along in that way. And so that's one of the things when you're in the negotiating stages, you want to think about it. And you want to go over to his house and look at how his mom is treated by his dad, how his mom is treated by his brothers, how his brothers treat his sisters. You want to study those things. That's the kind of thing you tell the girl. How are women treated in that family? Because it's going to be a pretty rare apple that falls far from the tree in that department. You say, how's a woman treated in that family? That's how I'm going to be treated. And she should study those things. But if she's got the romance going 9-0 and just kind of dazed in major crush time, danger, because she could get talked into things, get married to a guy that might not have been the very most brilliant idea. Okay, let me go through some questions because I got tons of stuff. I'll hit a couple other things here as we're going. All right, crushes. A crush has no moral quality at all. I'll get to that. A crush, the moral quality has to do with what happens in our will. Our emotions and passions have no moral qualities. Sin or virtue is in our will. A crush can be ordered towards the good. That's fine. If this is the guy you're going to marry, that's great. There's nothing disordered about that. But all of a sudden, somebody can be married. They come in and say, Father, I'm not in love with my husband anymore. Why? Because I just don't have these feelings. And you say, okay. And you talk, okay, but your feelings, but you still want him to get to heaven. You're still thankful you married him. You're glad he's the father of your children, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And you love him. I mean, what is this? It's love and like are not the same thing. Love is willing the good. Like, you all love your teenagers. You don't always like them. They're not the same. Emotions don't have the... So a crush can just flow out. And kids can easily get a crush. And it can be appropriate. They can get a crush on a teacher, on this person, on that person, on somebody else. It's no big deal. And it's a teaching moment for you. You don't have to have a panic attack, yank your kid away, panic that the other kid, whatever. It's nothing like that. In fact, I have a little thing, a handout I give to people if it's inappropriate, like they're married to someone, all of a sudden they finally have a crush on somebody, say, don't worry, it'll be gone in 6 weeks if you just do this. And it doesn't matter, but you just separate, at least physically, if it's a bad crush. A little kid, I wouldn't worry too much unless it's getting carried away, but it's a good time to talk and say, this can happen to any time in life. You could be married to someone that you love totally, and all of a sudden this happens, and it doesn't mean anything, because our passions fell with Adam, and they can just kind of, you won't even know, it'll just go bang, and it's flowed out towards that person. So if it's a problem kind of thing, you tell them, you just separate physically from the party, so you don't go out with them, you don't phone call them, you don't correspond, you don't email. You can't simultaneously cause an emotion to quiet down while you're throwing kerosene on it. So that's the first thing, is you separate physically, you separate mentally. You don't daydream about them and all that. It's no big deal. You just don't daydream about them. When you catch it, you make yourself think about something else. You don't bathe yourself in self-pity because they're not returning the thing. You don't do any of these things at all. You just sit there and say it's a crush. You don't save their letters. You don't save the little lock of hair. You don't save souvenirs. You get rid of all that stuff. It just won't work. This guy shows up at the seminary with the lock of his girl's hair. How long do you think he made it? 1 day. What a surprise. You're going to go to the seminary and bring a lock of your best girl's hair. I think you need to break up with her. That's how it works. That's the deal we make, right? I just gave up one more women than your husband did, So it's just crazy to do that. So then you got to keep a balanced mental attitude. You don't worry. The moods might come and go, and you tell them it'll go after a while. It's just going to go. It's a good teaching moment when a child has that. I said this was one of the questions. So it's a good teaching moment. No worries. If it's appropriate, it's appropriate. If it's not, you don't worry about it. But you don't make it into any kind of excitable thing. It's no big deal at all. Unless you handle it wrong. Okay. So I'll just go down through these. What is the purpose of finding out about courtship if from a young age children not know how to know themselves, opposite sex, or other persons in general? Well, it isn't, because courtship is just, as I said, this is just, if we're preparing, if we have a goal, and we have virtue as our goal, and we know what we're expecting. And in fact, some recommendations. I'll just hold up a few here. For making goals, these ones, Compass, a practical handbook on parental leadership by James B. Stenson. Absolutely, it's going to really help you do it. This guy has 30 years experience running some kind of elite Catholic private school. That's not the point. The point was he was clever enough to see which families were really, all these families kind of seem the same and models the community, but ones, their children went on, got married, got successful, got on with life, and the other ones. So he started interviewing parents from families where he consistently started seeing these kind of successful things. So he's written it down. He's got 3 decades. So you're taking advantage of people with gray hair. So Compass by James B. Stenson. He's got Lifeline, the religious upbringing of your children, and these have questions to think about. So it's not just practical things. And Upbringing, discussion handbook for parents of young children. So James B. Stenson, those ones, really good. I'm going to recommend a Protestant. You have to use judgment on some of the Protestant things he says, but there's a lot of good ideas. Preparing sons to provide for a single income family. This is a good idea. Preparing sons to provide for a single income family. Stephen Maxwell. You just have to read it with some discretion. But it's one of the things, if you're raising boys, you want to be thinking about that kind of stuff. What do we want? What do we expect our boys to do? We want to have goals. These are more, as the guy's getting older kind of things for the boys, but to be a man, life lessons for young men. It's not something you can do. I'll talk to the guys more about it, but it's something you can read and hand off. You get ideas. To be a man. That's James B. Stenson too. He's got a lot of good things. Another one by him. Father, the family protector. This one's for people who are getting married. And Legacy, Steve Wood. These are the two, like when people are getting married, that read this. Legacy by Steve Wood. Really good. This is the most spiritual out of all of them. It's eminently practical, but a lot of spiritual things. Okay. This one needs discretion, but you're raising girls. It's for women only. What you need to know about the inner lives of men. It's by Shanti Feldhahn. Now, there are certain points when they're talking about sex, these people don't have confession. I want to make some remarks on that because it's important. Years ago, I ended up in a situation where I was invited to talk to a bunch of Baptist seminarians. This is before I was a priest, before I was a seminarian. A bunch of Baptist seminarians and Baptists. They wouldn't have me in the church, but they had me right in a building next to their church and seminary. They actually broke away from the SBC because they thought it was too liberal. But during the course of it, of course, I was holding for scriptural inerrancy and literal meaning of Scripture, and they hold against that, which most people don't know. But it's in the specific line we got into it on, is they said, well, you can't possibly believe that when our Lord says, when you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you're guilty of adultery. I said, absolutely, and if you do that and die unrepentant, you go to hell. And man, these were good guys. You would have been happy to have them for your neighbors. I mean, theologically, we don't agree with them. But I mean, these were moral insofar as they can be Baptist seminarians. We got into this. I mean, they were screaming at me. No one can live like that. I said, yeah, you have to, or you're going to go to hell. You cannot, if you die unrepentant, if you're thinking about girls that are not your wife in any way like that, you're burning in hell, period. Well, I was a seminarian before I realized they were telling me about their interior life. Because it was actually true. They don't have Our Lady. Well, they have her, but they don't know that. They don't have Our Lady. They don't have confession. They don't have communion. They can't keep their minds pure without a particular grace from God. That's possible, but it's a particular grace. So when you read this, you have to keep that in mind. When you read things written by people outside the boundaries that aren't devout Catholics, they're not lying when they say certain of these things. They just don't see it. Because how can they see it? Because they can't get there from here. So there are certain things they're going to say about the sixth and ninth commandment that are just not possible. James Dobson, who has written some really good things on discipline and raising kids and all that, but he holds about self-abuse that everybody does this. Well, I'm sorry, Dr. Dobson, but everybody does not do this. And if they do and they die unrepentant, they'll go to hell. I mean, it's just, and I'm not picking on him, but why? They don't have confession, they don't have communion, they don't have Our Lady. They do in a remote sense, but they don't know that, huh? So these are people that are in the same moral foxhole as us in one sense, and yet they're light years away. Now, I'm not picking on them because look at how our Catholics are acting, like the original striped baboons. But anyway, so with certain qualities, this is not a bad thing to read, and then at certain ages, you can discuss those things with your girls so that they can think about this kind of stuff. If they're going to get married, it's pretty dumb to just go in and not really know like what guys are like. It's Shanti Shaunti, Feldham, Feldhahn. You can get this stuff used dirt cheap on Amazon, you know. Okay. People asked something about the talk. There shouldn't be just the talk. There should be a series of them at different ages. There's a couple things. I can email around, because I have it on e-documents, two different, that you can buy the books, but they're called Listen, Son, and Mother's Little Helper, that have like scripts. They've been around since the 50s. I have them on e-documents, so if people want that, I'll make that available. I just have to do that. So that has little things. But the best one overall that's balanced, it's been in print for about 50 years. All this stuff you always have to read and use your own judgment, but Tan brought it back out. I was glad to see, and I assume they still have it. Parents, Children, and the Facts of Life by Father Sattler. He was a good old Redemptorist back when they were Catholic. And so it's the most complete kind of thing that's balanced on this that you're going to find. There's, you know, and you can use your own judgment on this. But who's responsible for having the talk? You are, and your husband is. It's that basic, and you want to anticipate. So it should be a little early. He'll go through that and that kind of thing. When you're having that sort of thing, as they're getting older, you're going to have to deal with other things. Because in here it asks something about, I can't remember where it is. Yeah, keep away from Christopher West. I'm serious. I don't say the guy morally means something wrong. I won't read it from here. But he has a book called Good News About Sex and Marriage. And there's stuff in there that is against the natural law, divine positive law, and it's outrageous. And you read it, you just say, are you kidding me? And it's got an imprimatur on it from a good bishop. So what the problem is, a lot of what he has to say is actually good. But you better know more than he does, because when all of a sudden he launches out into the deep on things, and you say, no, whoa, flag on that play. And so that's all I want to say publicly. I can answer those questions, but you can ask me in the confessional if you have problems with that. But I just don't want to get into it. I don't like bringing up his name because I'm always afraid somebody's going to go buy the book and try to see what's wrong with it. Don't do that, okay? I don't get paid for this. I don't have a particular agenda. I'm trying to, I want to be saved by telling people the truth. Just steer clear of it, and then you don't have to study this stuff, okay? But I actually translated something from the Latin, which I can't believe. I mean, it's something from the Holy See, but it shows how disconnected priests and bishops are because they don't read the documents anymore because they can't. But this is only from like 1914, that's saying that before a woman can engage in this kind of behavior, she has to die first. Okay, and yet he says, no, it's nothing intrinsically wrong. Yeah. Okay, Chris. Okay. So, let's see here. Well, here we go. This answers the crush things, I think. Relationships, yeah. So I just go through that and these. Many courtship models involve a controlling father who decides who may court his daughter. How involved should the father be in the decision of who courts a girl? Well, we don't have arranged marriages here. I've had very good. I had couples that had from Carol in my last parish. They were wonderful, but we don't do that here, and it's not something we should start. I mean, if people are from there, that's fine, but it's not. We don't. I don't think the father is more like he's the father. So it's not some control freak thing. That's just not. The parents, in fact, the moral principle is the child has to take the counsel of their parents, but they don't have to take the advice. So the answer to that is the father should be in a loving way. But if he's a father and trying to look after his daughter, and if you're raising them up so they trust, they trust the parents, this shouldn't be a concern. This evangelical thing, when I read, I thought that's just weird. I mean, I'm the oldest brother, so I'd be in Central Montana. One of my students would say, "Your sister has a new boyfriend," because she was going to college. It's 250 miles away, but it's sort of like a small town spread over a lot of country. So I drive down there to meet him because it's my job. Just tell him how it was in our family. And, and everything's going to be just great as long as my sister is going to be fine, and that's it. But no, there's rules. They know. I mean, you're not being a total ape, but you just remind them that this isn't just like any other girl. This is my sister, and I hope that I get to you before my dad does. And it would be just a little short thing. I don't mind that stuff. No, look, that stuff, I'll tell one. So I asked a girl out. It was the second. I guess the first one I went was we were at the auction barn. It's a real romantic. The auctioneer selling cattle, and we walked around, so the parents kept track. But the next one, so I had to go over there. We'll go to the place. And, I was more scared of her than I was of him. So I had to come in and talk to the dad. He's cleaning his guns, And I didn't even think about it till later, because it's not that big of a deal. I'm not advising that, that's not why I'm a priest, but you don't need to do this, over-the-top stuff, but you're not from, Boone, Tooley, Montana either, so. How can we use examples of our own imperfect relationships to make them better good? Single parents, divorce, separation, mom and dad, grandparents, friends, and all. Well, we're not from the Holy Family, so just honesty about these things, and we just have to be honest, and we want to surround ourselves with other good Catholics. We always had people involved in our family. A lot of times they would stay with us. In the 70s, they'd be in drugs, so they'd come out there and live with us because their families had sent. We knew they were up to stuff, big deal. they're Catholics. My parents were going to love them. So they're like brothers and sisters to us, There's one down here you can pray for him. I won't say his name. He hasn't seen me since I've been here, and he was like a brother to me. He's in the oil patch business, but he lives right over here. And he knows that he ran into me at my parents' house and told me where he lived. He's not living a good life, but you still love him. That's life. We're not in the Garden of Eden. If we look at how our Lord acted, we've got to be, we have to use good judgment. We don't want to bring people into the home. Like if someone is going to keep being strung out on drugs or is living a really sexualized lifestyle, okay. But people that have sinned and are doing better? Well, we're all like that to some degree, unless you're the Blessed Virgin, huh? So we just have to use good judgment. You have good judgment. You got the grace estate. I wouldn't worry too much about that. And especially now, we're living in a brothel. This is a pagan environment. It's very much like the early church. And in the early church, look at the situations that the different saints came out of. And if you don't know, you should read some of that kind of stuff. It'd help. Because you see where the people came from and the kind of pagan backgrounds they had, huh? And yet there they were. And it isn't just St. Augustine either. Okay. We just don't, honesty, we don't have to, by honesty, I don't mean kiss and tell stuff, but just honesty about, well, this isn't the ideal. We know what the ideal is. The Holy Family's ideal. But we're working towards that. That's what we have to do. God will work with us if we're like that. It's a willing to be honest before God, and then we'll get the right people in our lives, huh? And they'll help us, because we're all in it together, and we have to see that clearly. Even if there's people we don't like, we can still love them and pray for them, huh? And with the kids, we can tell them, because they're going to ask. We don't want to lie or freak out. All right. When is a young adult? I already talked about that. How do we help our children deal with ideas of alternative lifestyles, so-called marriages, cohabiting within the family or the culture at large? Well, they're somewhat subjective. As they become more aware of it, then you have to talk. You have the grace estate, but as they become more aware of it, you have to tell them. They're just going to know these things, and you need to do that. How you handle boys is a little different than how you handle girls, too. Not necessarily talking about these things, but there's a different kind of protection that you want towards a guy. The guy, you got to be raising guys to be leaving home and going out into the world. And it's a big, bad, ugly world. And that's just the way it is. He's going to have to make his way in life, and God will give him the graces. Now, that your husband is especially important, and the men he surrounds himself with, but you don't want to smother that no more 27-year-old thumb-sucking guys. I'm sick of it. I've had it up to here. And I just mean as a man, it's so frustrating to see all these women that should be married, and you have these guys that are stuck on Game Boy and porn, It's just crazy. We need to raise guys to get out the door and do things. So they're going to find out things. They're going to get bumps and bruises, but you're trying to raise them to get out there and get with the program. Okay. What's the best message to introduce the difference between boys and girls in early age to foster a lifetime of honoring the opposite sex? The way you treat your husband and the way your husband treats you. If you're honoring your husband, if you're acting like a lady, if you're fussing over when he comes home, stuff like that, they're learning every day from that. That's way more important than all the words you say, and I'm not saying not to say them. That and reading the lives of the saints to them and talking about those things and about our Lord and the Scripture. If you're reading the Scriptures to them and the lives of the saints and your example, that'll go forever. The example of a mother can't be overestimated. You know these guys, sorry. You'll meet guys that come back from these crazy wars that have stayed pure. And I don't think you have any idea what our military's like. They've stayed pure because they wouldn't want their mom to think the less of them, or Our Lady. And you can get away with anything, and who's going to know? So you'll get it just by being a good woman. I would like to know the rules for Catholic court. Oh, we talked about that. What books to help with education on Catholic court? Actually, 2 books that are kind of, it seems like one's not related at all. This one is All for the Love of Mothers, Memoirs of a Catholic Midwife. This is one of the more interesting books you can ever read. She's a German midwife from the 1880s to the First World War. And, you know, eminently practical, single woman, but a real view into life, families, the different kind of things. It's just another way of approaching femininity and what it is to be a Catholic woman on the hard end of life. A great one at a certain age to talk about those stories with your girls as they're getting to a certain age. You just read it, you'll see what I mean. Someone sent this to me when I was really, really sick. A wonderful woman, 12 kids, sent it to me and said, "Father, this reminds me so much of you." And I'm really sick and I'm opening this thing up at Christmas and I'm thinking, a midwife. It's the closest thing to being a priest that I think a woman could write. So I know what she meant. But I was just like, are you kidding me? I have the other one out. He's got the same thing. Steve Wood, ABCs of Choosing a Good Husband. I have girls read it and just pass around. It's a place to start, and they can read, and it just gives them something. So I lend that out to girls when they're 13, 14, you know, when they start first, they quit thinking about horses and start thinking about guys kind of thing. And so that one, you know, ABCs, it's something, you read it first, you give it to them, you know, it's not going to hurt. So because what you want to do, you're trying to get them ready for a vocation. So they're thinking about what to do. We wouldn't have had to do this. Like, why were people able to get married when I was 16? Because everybody kind of knew what it was. And people got married and stayed married. And I'm from the fist fight social class. I mean, there are plenty of these things that were, oh boy, you didn't know it was a prize fight or a marriage, but they stayed married and raised those kids. That doesn't happen anymore. It's all falling apart. It's all falling apart. So we need to do a little, you know, those kind of things like that. Okay, so let's see here. All right, got that. In your experience, if one of the young adults in the courtship relationship attends a novus order, what are the chances your child will leave the extraordinary form? I'm not worried about that, because if you've formed your kids to be holy, if they're really serious about their holiness, I mean, I'm just going to, you know, I don't mind saying this at all. Why do I do what I do? Because I think it's a more perfect expression as the priest of a submission to truth. I can speak for the priest. When I'm saying Mass, there's almost no in it, if I'm saying it right, huh? It's not about me. Every single thing is orchestrated. I don't get to pick anything. I know where my hands have to be. I know where my eyes have to be. I know what my mind has to be thinking about. I know where I'm supposed to be stepping, all these things. So that I grow littler and Christ grows bigger. But it's not an exterior thing. It's an exterior expression of an interior desire to submit to the truth. And I think if we're bringing people up to understand what it is that we're doing, that we're being called to holiness, I just think that the reception of communion itself is enough to do it. Read Bishop Athanasius Schneider's book, Dominus Est, on communion. This guy's holy. He gave us our retreat this year. He's a bishop from Kazakhstan. So he grew up, you can look at his interview with Mitch Pacwa. It's online. You can watch it. But he grew up in Kazakhstan. They're from Black Sea Germans. So Catherine the Great invited Germans to go on the Volga and Black Sea. My brother-in-law is Black Sea German. My cousins are Volga Deutsch. So some of them escaped before, a lot of them got out right in the early 1900s before everything went purely cattywampus. And so they're mostly settled, you know, Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Montana. There's gobs of them in that part of our country there. But the ones that didn't get away, Stalin rounded them up and sent them to Kazakhstan. like that. So you have these Catholics in a Muslim part of the world just out there and getting abused and all that. And when he talks about the reverence of the women in his family for the most blessed sacrament, it's extraordinary. So these underground priests would show up by ritual, saying Easter, St. John, liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, the Latin Mass. He'd show up and hear confessions all night, and they try to say, Father, no. He says, no, I have to hear everybody's confessions, because if the police come, I might not get hurt. Later on, he's martyred. But his grandma was dying. Now, his grandma was an extraordinary woman. Stalin's secret police shot his grandfather, and then they started to tear the religious pictures off the wall. And she started yelling at him, you didn't put them up, you're not going to take them down. And they stopped, and they never did that. Later on, when she's in a camp, they were ordered to work on Sunday. She says, I don't work on the Sabbath. And she wouldn't, and they didn't shoot her. So she's dying anyway later on, and the mother says, can I get communion? So the priest gives her communion in an envelope, because he's out of there, this underground church stuff. So she takes new white gloves and a tweezers and gives her mother communion and then burns the envelope. How different that is. Then they got a permission to move to Germany, And their priest warned them. They received communion in the hand. She goes, what? I mean, they're totally scandalized. She swore, we will never do this. Never. When they get to the village, there's 4 Catholic churches. The first Sunday they go there, it's communion in the hand. The next one, they go to then she's just weeping. What is going on with our Lord like this, huh? When Bishop Schneider got made a bishop in Kazakhstan, they had the meeting of the bishops of Kazakhstan, and he made a proposal which they voted on and agreed to, and the Holy See approved. It doesn't matter what rite you go to in Kazakhstan, you must receive communion on the tongue kneeling. That's the Lord. If we really understand, there's too much tradi politics that don't mean anything. We have to think about who it is that we're receiving, and we'll speak to it. If we're going to something, any Catholic that really understands his faith wants to express who our Lord is. And this is not the only way. Go to the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. It's beautiful. We have a Maronite in here. It's beautiful. Because you're expressing something about our Lord. I don't think it's a worry if we really understand our faith and have a really Eucharistic understanding of it. I don't think that's a worry at all. And it's certainly not, I don't worry about it when I know it does happen with people, but when I'm preparing people, that's one of the kind of things we talk about. Because you can't have this kind of schizophrenic type thing. And it is. And it's unfortunate, but it is. There's no when I go home, so I haven't been to any masses in Texas except the ones I say or him or Father. When I go home, I have to hear about what's going on. And it has effects on the guys too. You can take a lot more than we can. A lot more. A lot more. The social class where most of the priests in this country have traditionally come from is the lower class, because that's where we're from. And it just went up. There hasn't, those were the big families, the guys with in-ground, they had to take lava soap to try to get the grease and stuff off their knuckles, and they're kneeling there, leading the rosary at Mass, and they're all gone almost now at home. When I drive to town, I can point, well, that ranch, they were Catholic, and they were Catholic. I can go all the way up there. We're the only ones on our road, I think, left. Some of the women still go. But the husbands don't go. And when the husbands don't go, guess who else doesn't go? The boys don't go, and you don't have the vocations. So in eastern Montana, we got 2 dioceses, and they're big. They're really big, because in a state, it's not as big as Texas, but when you just have 2 dioceses in a state that size, they're big. I was talking to one of the priests when I was home. There's under 30 priests in an area the size of West Texas. Because there's not a Eucharistic devotion that there needs to be. And it's all this hallelujah stuff. It's not going to happen. It does happen to some people, but I wouldn't, if we really have that Eucharistic devotion and then the proper preparation by the priest, I don't worry about that. I don't worry about that. I'm just going to skip some of these questions because of the time. I don't want to. Once you have a child living at home, according to any hard and fast rules and when and where they can be alone to talk, going to restaurants, activities alone, they should mostly, I mean, if you're raising them to be adults, you're letting off more and more of the reins. Maybe this is one of the things the guy's talking about. If you're asking me, I already said it, I don't think they should be catcalling, he and hawing and roaming around on the phone much after 10 o'clock unless there's a proportional reason. Like if they're both working till 10 o'clock, then yeah, but they should be careful about, and that's the first thing I'd tell them. You just be careful because we're weak, and you're not going to talk all this kind of over-the-top stuff when it's bright sunlight. And I tell them, don't be alone together except in public. You know, if you got little brother or little sister, take them with you. They'll tell mom everything. You don't have to worry. But it's important. I think a lot of this is common. It's just horse sense. It's common sense. You don't, you know, it is common sense. So I don't think hard and fast rules, I don't think that's the place really of the priest. The hard and fast rules are that they shouldn't be going out unless this is going towards marriage, at least potentially. You know, in other words, we're ready to get married. This might be the one I'm getting married to, you know, and I'll see. But the corollary of that is, as soon as you realize, well, I'm not really interested in marrying this person, they break up right then. Because otherwise you're going to get, look, if you keep going, you'll get attached to somebody, even if you realize it's going to be dumb. Because that's just human nature too. And you're going to get in trouble if you keep going out with somebody, you know. That's dumb too. See, you get married or you don't. So after a while you realize this isn't going anywhere. Break it off right then before you got all this emotional investment and becomes a fake divorce. You don't want to get emotionally invested in somebody that's not going somewhere. So you go out with them for a little while. That's why, with this, it sounded, he says it's the same as engagement. Well, I don't know what they mean in the evangelical world. I'm not picking on them, but I don't really care about that because I'm not talking to them. If I was, I'd try to understand that, but I'm talking to you. What we want to do is just, it's a practical thing where you say, I'm ready to get married. This, you know, if it's a girl, this guy can take care of me, you know. Look, and I don't really care. I mean, if she wants to be a trapper's wife and live in a wall tent, that's fine, good to go, because a roof over your head and food on the table doesn't mean anything fancy to me, especially where I'm from. I could care less. But it has to be something she'd trail along behind. But as long as he can do that, then what's the big deal? Same with him. He looks at her and he realizes, I don't want this to be the mother of my children. Break it off then. You owe it to her. He especially owes it more to her than she does to him because he's the guy and he's wasting her time. But that's the kind of thing you want to tell the guys, don't waste the girl's time. It's fish or cut bait. You don't string her along while you're looking for somebody else because that's not honest before God, and God will punish you in your marriage if you do that. And He will. He will punish somebody in their marriage. If a guy tries pulling that stunt, he's going to get punished. That's not going to be a good marriage. Okay. Yeah, how do we respond out of fear of our mistakes, but let our children see the beauty of how it should be? That's the whole idea of reading. I'm just proposing these things by Stenson and the other ones, and the one about preparing guys to have a single parent. So you sit down, you and your husband read these things, and you kind of come up with, where are we trying to go with this Hummer? I mentioned a horse because it's the same idea. If you don't know where you're trying to go when you're starting that horse, forget about it. It's going to outpo, as far as I'm concerned. You're not going to have anything worth it. You got to sit here and say, where am I going with this child? Where do we see this child in 20 years? And then you work back. And if you have some kind of goals, and I'm not talking about their exact vocation because that's between them and God, but you at least get them so they can go into any vocation because they have the virtue. So you say, and if you have that kind of thing, then you can start, you and your husband are watching them and saying, you know, this child lies too much. What are we going to do about that? That isn't insane. And, you know, because there's ways of doing it the wrong way. This child shirks on work. You know, you're looking at where are their weaknesses and what can we do to make the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult. Because that's what it is. It's just the same as training horses. I'm not trying to be rude about or dogs. And I'm not trying to pick on your kids and say, but the concepts are the same. Consistency, having a clear goal, and having expectations that are always the same in that way. And you're gonna have some flex because every child isn't the same. Every horse isn't the same. You got to have some flex in this. The perfect's enemy of good, so you say, that's good enough right now. We're going to work on that, but we got a few more years. Do you see what I mean? But you're working on that kind of thing, and you just keep on trying to shore up the weak things. You don't have little discussion. I see sometimes parents having these discussions with a 4-year-old. Shut up, he's not the age of reason. No. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. He doesn't need an explanation. Teenagers need an explanation, sometimes a detailed explanation, because you're trying to teach them how to be an adult. So that time you're setting them down and saying, here's why, blah, blah, because you're giving them more information as it's needed, because you want them to leave home and see how to, and it doesn't mean we're perfect. And if you screw up, you say, I'm sorry, we were wrong on that, we'd have done this a little different, that's it. That's just being humble. But that's what you want. You want to have those kind of things. And we don't want to go from fear of our mistakes. Fear is not a good principle to act from. But the principle is we got goals. We're going to go that way. And you got the grace estate. You got Catholicism. What more? It's the greatest. I mean, it's unbelievable. All the martyrs. We have the best thing going. We've got everything we possibly could need. That we just have to cooperate with God and get in there. And He lets you be the parents of immortal beings. He could have made babies from scratch, just like Adam and Eve. He lets you and your husband make babies. It's so amazing to me. You know, you baptize a baby, see, this is an immortal being. It's amazing to me. When you're pregnant, it's amazing to me because I think there's an immortal being in this person. It's immortal. I mean, I know you know that, but you could meditate on that. And He's put you in charge of it. So in so many ways, you're determining where this person is going to spend eternity. And so that's what you do. You're saying, all right, I want them to be in heaven. So what are we going to do to make sure that happens? And we're not doing it from fear. We're doing it from the love of the Lord. We want to do it from the love of the Lord. I want to read you something about the liturgy, which is interesting. Why are you going with this, Father? You'll see. Now, this is from 100 years ago by Lambert Bodin, Don Bodin. Liturgy, the Life of the Church. It's incredible. We should perhaps surprise more than one reader by saying that in order to remedy the evil from which the faithful of our generation are suffering in regard to liturgy, it will not suffice to initiate them into the ritual formulas and ceremonies, into the dogmatic symbolic meanings of the latter, and into their historical origin. This knowledge is undoubtedly necessary for rendering the meaning of the Sunday or the participation of the mysteries and other functions of the Church properly intelligible, instructive, attractive, and fruitful. But the work of liturgical restoration is intended to combat an evil that lies deeper, to pursue its purpose more thoroughly. So this is before the liturgical movement went off the rails totally. The piety of the Christian people, and hence their actions in life, are not grounded sufficiently in the fundamental truths that constitute the soul of the liturgy, and therefore it should be the soul of our lives. That is, in the destiny of all things under the glory of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, the necessary and universal contemplation of Jesus Christ, the central place of the Eucharistic sacrifice in the Christian life, the mission of the hierarchy in regards to our union with God. This is really important to keep in mind, in spite of the fact that so many of us with the collars on are wackos, heretics, and immoral. It's still of divine constitution of the church. Pope, bishop, priest, faithful. It can't be gotten around. It's part of salvation. Even if not everybody in the vine is going to heaven, it's necessary to be in a branch that's connected to the vine. Okay. The net mission of the hierarchy in regard to our union with God, the visible realization of the communion of saints. All these truths which find expression in every liturgical act are asleep in men's souls. The faithful have lost consciousness of it. You're trying to raise saints in a brothel. They have to see, what are we doing here? I had kids, it just as a contrast, and it's not sufficient. The catechism is not sufficient. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It has to be from the inside out. It has to be something that they understand, and you're the mothers. More than anybody else, since you have that daily contact with them, they have to get it from the earliest age if possible. Years ago, some kids had interviewed me. There was one of these high schools where the parents have to spend a fortune to send them to one of these fancy Catholic high schools. And accidentally, they got a theology teacher that was Catholic. And so he had a list of priests that they were allowed to interview, and I was the only guy. So it was driving me crazy. But anyway, I had to meet with a bunch of these kids, about vocation. So I'm dressed like this, big clue. And we have to meet at Starbucks. They're starting off on the wrong foot with me, but Okay, so there I am. And for an hour, they're asking me all these questions about vocations and all this. And so I'm asking them what they want to do. They're telling me all this, stuff. These are nice kids. Nice kids. I'm not picking on them, but you'll see where I'm going. So at the end of all that, I said, okay, we've spent an hour and a half. Thank you for the coffee. I just want to ask you one question. What's the purpose of your life? And I let everyone answer. And I'm not being irreverent when I say an atheistic Jew could have made the same kind of answers. They weren't horrible answers, but you'd think, after an hour of talking to a priest dressed like this about religious matters, somewhere in that, the Trinity, God, heaven, I don't know, anything to do with what we're doing here. I told him, that's question number 2. Question number 1 is, who made me? And question number 2 is, why did God make me? And so I told him, none of you are ready for your first communion. I'm sorry, I wouldn't give you communion. And that got, these are seniors in high school with all these rich kids driving fancy cars. Got their nose really bent out of shape. But I wanted to bend their nose out of shape. Because it isn't enough to just go through the motions. It has to come from the inside out. And that can only come, barring divine grace, that comes in the home. Our Catholic homes have to be Catholic homes. Not American homes with some Catholic, holy water spread around or something. They have to be Catholic homes. They have to be places of prayer. And you have to be praying. And I want to encourage you now, and then I'll end on this because I could keep going and I realize the time and I'm sorry. Sorry. Of the holiness that I've personally dealt with as a priest, and I've dealt with some real holiness, and I mean that in the formal sense. There's a remarkable amount of it in the homes. And I mean formally holy people. I mean people that are going to die and go to heaven if they don't change what they're doing. I mean go right to heaven if they don't change what they're doing. There's real holiness. And it isn't by doing extraordinary things. It's by doing your duties in your state in life as best as you can and praying and try to conform yourself to Our Lady and really try to enter in to the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And you don't have to be some mystic and you don't have to be St. Thomas Aquinas, and I'm certainly not making fun of either of them. You have to be who you are and love God because He loved you first. And He died for you. And He let you be a Catholic. And He let you have the faith in a time of heresy and apostasy and sin and chaos. And maybe some of you have come out of that. It doesn't matter because it's not opposed to becoming a saint. But you have to make the sacrifice. You have to do the prayer. I can't do the prayer for you. You have to do the spiritual reading and you have to spend that time